Your children don't fit the brand image for Olivia's party. My sister Rachel said it into the phone as casually as if she were ordering a latte. She didn't stumble, she didn't apologize, she just delivered the verdict. The Harbor Crest Yacht Club has a specific aesthetic, Emily. I have VIP guests flying in, people Daniel needs to impress. I can't have unpolished children running around ruining the visual. I gripped the granite edge of my kitchen island. It wasn't about capacity, it was about curation. My children weren't family to her. They were bad marketing. It's nothing personal, she added, her voice airy. It's just business. I hung up the phone and stared at the blank screen. I didn't scream. I didn't throw it across the room. I just felt a cold, heavy stone settle in my stomach. It wasn't the rudeness that paralyzed me. It was the logistics of the heartbreak I now had to deliver. My 6-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son were in the next room drawing pictures for a cousin they adored. They had been talking about Olivia's birthday for 3 weeks. They had outfits picked out. They had practiced how to say happy birthday without shouting. And now I had to walk in there and tell them they weren't wanted. I walked into the playroom. They looked up, beaming, holding up crayon drawings of balloons and cakes. I sat on the floor, trying to keep my voice steady. Guys, plans have changed, I said, forcing a smile that felt like plastic. We aren't going to Olivia's party on Saturday. I expected a tantrum. I expected tears about cake or goodie bags. I was prepared for disappointment. I was not prepared for the quiet. My daughter lowered her drawing. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask about the bouncy castle. She looked at me with wide, devastatingly serious eyes and asked the one question that would burn down my relationship with my sister forever. Mommy, are we bad kids? Her voice was a whisper. Is that why Olivia can't play with us? Because we're not good? The air left the room. This is the thing people like Rachel don't understand about children. Children don't understand concepts like venue capacity or brand image. To a child, exclusion is a mirror. When family shuts the door, a child doesn't look at the door and think, oh, they must be busy. They look in the mirror and see a defect. They don't think Aunt Rachel is rude. They think, I am unlovable. My sister hadn't just uninvited them from a party. She had handed my children a distorted mirror and told them to stare at their own inadequacy. No, I said, my voice fierce, pulling them both into my chest so they couldn't see my face. You are perfect. You are wonderful. This has nothing to do with you. But I could feel the doubt in their small bodies. The damage was done. The seed was planted. And in that moment, my sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical rage. That night, when Michael came home, the house was silent. The kids were asleep, exhausted from crying. I was sitting at the kitchen island, in the dark, a glass of water untouched in front of me. Michael walked in, loosening his tie. He saw my face and stopped. He didn't say a word. He just waited. I told him everything. I told him about the brand image. I told him about the VIP guests. And then I told him what our daughter had asked me. I watched my husband carefully. Michael is a man of few words. He is the kind of man who listens more than he speaks, whose power lies in his stillness. I expected him to be annoyed, maybe even angry, but I didn't get anger. I got something much more terrifying. He went completely still. He unbuttoned his cuffs with precise mechanical movements, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She said, brand image? He asked, his voice devoid of any inflection. Yes, I said. Unpolished children would ruin the visual for Daniel's investors. Michael nodded once, slowly. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He didn't shout insults about my sister. He just walked over to the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and took a long, slow sip. When he turned back to me, his face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were different. They were cold. They were calculating. "Okay," he said. Just one word. But in that single word, I heard the sound of a judge passing a sentence from which there would be no appeal. He wasn't just a husband defending his wife anymore. He was a father who had just decided that someone was going to pay for making his children feel small. And Michael had the currency to ensure the price was steep. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for sanity. Surely my mother, the woman who still kept my kindergarten handprint in a frame, would understand that excluding a child based on brand image was madness. I walked into their kitchen expecting outrage. Instead, I found a united front. My mother, Linda, was arranging flowers in a vase, while my father, Robert, read the paper. They looked up as I entered, their expressions guarded. I didn't waste time. Did you know? Did you know Rachel uninvited the kids because they aren't polished enough for her yacht party? My mother sighed, the sound of someone forced to deal with a tedious child. Emily, honey, don't use that word. It is harsh, Mom. It's cruel. She told my daughter she didn't fit the aesthetic. She's under a lot of pressure, my father said, folding his paper. You don't understand the level Daniel is operating at now. This party isn't just a birthday, it's a networking event. He's closing a $45 million development deal. The investors will be there. I stared at them. So my children are a liability to a business deal? They didn't answer. And in that silence, something inside me cracked for good. "They're 6 and 4, I said. "They're well-behaved. Since when does our family prioritize investors over grandchildren?" "It's not about prioritizing," my mother said, smoothing a petal. "It's about the bigger picture. Rachel and Daniel are trying to build a life. They need this to go perfectly. Having unpredictable elements could distract from the atmosphere they need to curate." Unpredictable elements. That's what my children were to them now? Not family, not flesh and blood, just chaotic variables in a curated life. "You're enabling her," I said, my voice rising. "You're telling her it's okay to treat people like props." "We're supporting her success," my father countered, his tone hardening. "And frankly, Emily, you're being selfish. You're making this about your feelings instead of celebrating your sister's ambition. Daniel is going places. We should all be helping them get there, not dragging them down with petty grievances." I looked around the kitchen I grew up in. It was the same granite, the same oak cabinets, but the air had changed. It was thinner now, harder to breathe. I realized then that my parents weren't just bystanders. They were gatekeepers. They had bought into Rachel's delusion because they wanted to be adjacent to that success. They wanted to be the parents of the wealthy developer's wife, the grandparents photographed at the resort opening. If sacrificing my children's feelings was the price of admission to that elite club, they had already paid it. "I see," I said quietly. "I understand the bigger picture now." I walked out without saying goodbye. They thought I was accepting my place. They thought I was agreeing to stand behind the velvet rope they had erected around their new, shiny life. But as I got into my car, I wasn't thinking about acceptance. I was thinking about what Michael had said the night before. My parents believed that exclusivity was power. They believed that by curating their circle, they were elevating themselves. But they didn't understand the mechanics of true exclusivity. They were about to learn that when you build a wall to keep people out, you also lock yourself in with the consequences. Saturday arrived with a sky so blue it felt like an insult. It was the kind of weather that wedding photographers pray for and event planners charge extra to guarantee. Perfect yachting weather. While my sister was undoubtedly overseeing the placement of linen napkins and instructing servers on the proper angle to pour champagne at the Harbor Crest Yacht Club, I was packing juice boxes and granola bars into a backpack. We didn't tell the kids about the party happening across town. We told them we had a surprise adventure. We drove them to the city planetarium. It was a conscious choice. If Rachel wanted to teach them about exclusion and velvet ropes, I wanted to teach them about the universe. I wanted them to see something so vast, so infinite, that the petty social hierarchy of a birthday party would seem microscopic by comparison. Inside the domed theater, the lights dimmed and the artificial city skyline faded into a brilliant, star-studded black. My children gasped. They reached up as if they could pluck the constellations from the dark. For an hour, there were no VIP lists. There were no brand images. There was just wonder. They were small, yes, but they were small in the way we all are against the backdrop of galaxies, not small because an adult decided they weren't important enough to make the cut. But even in the dark, the ghost of the other party haunted me. I checked my watch. 2:00. The guests would be arriving. Daniel would be shaking hands, flashing his veneer smile, scanning the room for the investors who held his future in their portfolios. Rachel would be posing, making sure every angle was flattering, every moment camera ready. When we emerged from the theater, blinking in the harsh afternoon sunlight, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Then it buzzed again. And again. The family group chat. I didn't want to look. I knew it would hurt, but the compulsion to see the life we were barred from was too strong. Photos were flooding in. Crystal flutes against sparkling water, white linen tables, my parents smiling, cocktails in hand, looking every inch the proud grandparents of the chosen child. Then a photo from Rachel. It was a wide shot of the deck, populated with men in linen suits and women in silk sundresses. The decor was immaculate, all white and gold, sterile and expensive. The caption read, "So glad we kept it exclusive. The vibe is perfect." It wasn't enough to exclude us. She had to celebrate the exclusion. She had to frame our absence not as a regret, but as a design feature. Kept it exclusive. That was the dagger. She was bragging that the party was better because my children weren't there to tarnish it. I felt a shadow fall over my shoulder. Michael was standing behind me, looking at the screen. He hadn't said much all day, just watched the kids with a fierce, protective intensity. Now he read the caption. He didn't frown. He didn't sigh. His face hardened, like concrete setting. The last trace of hesitation vanished from his eyes. "The vibe is perfect," he repeated quietly. It sounded less like a comment and more like an assessment. Let's see how long that lasts. Michael walked a few steps away, phone already in his hand. He didn't pace, he didn't rush. He stood perfectly still, like a statue carved from stone. I watched him dial a number. He didn't scroll through contacts. He typed it in from memory. I moved closer, drawn by a curiosity that outweighed my anxiety. I had never seen Michael work. I knew he was in finance. I knew he did well, better than well, but he never talked about it. He was just Michael, the man who fixed leaky faucets, the man who read bedtime stories, the man who owned 3 identical gray Swellers. Until now. "This is Michael," he said into the phone. His voice was low, flat, stripped of warmth. "I need to confirm the financing terms for the Harbor Crest project, specifically the character clause in the underwriting agreement for Daniel Sterling's development firm." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'm aware of the projection numbers," he said, cutting off whoever was on the other end. "I'm looking at the ethical compliance section. Paragraph 4, subsection B, conduct detrimental to the reputation of the holding company." Another pause. "Yes, that one." I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. "Effective immediately," Michael continued. "Pull the funding. Notify the partners that the primary stakeholder has lost confidence in the leadership's moral judgment. Blacklist the firm from future capital rounds." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. "I want the email sent now," he said. "Yes, during the event. Make sure the notification hits his inbox before the toast." He ended the call without saying goodbye. Michael slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned to face me. His expression was calm, almost serene, like he had just finished a routine chore. "Michael," I whispered, "what did you just do?" "I enforced a boundary," he said. My stomach dropped. You pulled the funding for Daniel's resort?" "I own the holding company underwriting the loan," he replied simply. "Daniel needed $45 million to break ground. He doesn't have it anymore." I stared at him. "You own the holding company?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Since before I met you." He took my hands in his grip steady and warm. "I keep my name off the letterhead for a reason," he said. "I don't hide my wealth because I'm ashamed of it. I hide it because it acts as a filter. It shows me who people really are when they think I have nothing to offer." He looked directly into my eyes. "It shows me how they treat you when they think you're ordinary." A wave of understanding washed over me. Daniel and Rachel failed the test. They treated our children like props because they thought we didn't matter. They thought we were powerless. He squeezed my hands gently. They were wrong. I looked at this quiet man in his gray sweater and realized I didn't just love him. I admired him. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't threatened, he hadn't made a scene. He had simply decided that anyone who made his children feel small would no longer be allowed to stand tall. "They're going to lose everything," I said softly, the reality sinking in. They lost everything the moment they decided a brand image was worth more than family. I just formalized the transaction. I wasn't at the Harbor Crest Yacht Club that afternoon, but I know exactly what happened. I know because when you humiliate a man in front of the very people he is trying to impress, the story travels faster than light. And I know because half the VIPs on Rachel's exclusive guest list were actually Michael's subordinates, senior vice presidents and directors from his holding company, who had accepted the invitation out of curiosity about the new development partner. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the sun was at its peak. The champagne was flowing. The brand image was, by all accounts, flawless. Daniel stood on the upper deck, tapping a crystal flute with a silver spoon. He was glowing with the arrogance of a man who believed he had secured his legacy. "To family," he said, raising his glass. The word tasted like a lie in his mouth. "And to the future." He smiled, feeding off the attention. "As many of you know," he continued, "we are on the verge of breaking ground on a $45 million resort project that will redefine luxury on this coast. To the Harbor Crest expansion." There was a ripple of polite applause. Rachel stood beside him, beaming. Her curated perfection had finally been achieved. She scanned the crowd, satisfied that she had successfully filtered out the unpolished elements of her family. Then Daniel's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He ignored it. He lifted his glass, preparing to sip. It buzzed again. Longer this time. Urgent. Then, to his left, his business partner's phone buzzed. Then another. And another. A low, synchronized hum rolled through the crowd, the sound of dozens of corporate inboxes receiving a priority one notification at the exact same moment. Daniel frowned, irritated by the disruption. He pulled his phone out, likely intending to silence it. He glanced at the screen. The smile didn't fade. It fell off. The email was from the Centennial Group's legal department. Subject: immediate termination of agreement. The body of the message was short, brutal. It didn't cite market conditions. It didn't cite interest rates. It cited paragraph 4, subsection B, ethical misalignment. The financing was withdrawn due to conduct incompatible with the organization's core family values. Daniel froze. He looked up, pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He turned toward his partner, who was frantically typing on his own phone, mouthing the words, "It's gone! All of it!" But the true humiliation hadn't even begun yet. That began when the guests, the VIPs Rachel had sacrificed her relationship with me to impress, checked their own phones. These were men and women who reported directly to Michael. They knew exactly what a Priority 1 termination meant. It meant the person on the other end was radioactive. It meant associating with Daniel was now a career risk. The atmosphere on the yacht shifted instantly. It went from celebration to crime scene. One by one, the investors and executives set their crystal flutes down on the white linen tables. They didn't finish their drinks. They didn't say goodbye. They simply checked the time, adjusted their jackets, and walked toward the exit. "Wait!" said Rachel, her voice rising in panic as she watched her meticulously curated guest list evaporate. "We haven't cut the cake yet. Where's everyone going?" No one answered her. They were already texting assistants, canceling meetings, scrubbing Daniel's firm from calendars and contacts. In the world of high finance, silence is the loudest sound there is. Daniel stood frozen on the deck, the $45 million toast dying in his throat. He stared at his phone, then at the retreating backs of the people he had built his future on, and then he understood. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't market volatility. This was intentional. He dialed the number for his contact at the holding company. Voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. He turned slowly toward Rachel. She was standing beside the untouched cake, still holding the knife, her face pale and uncomprehending. "Daniel?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's over," he whispered. "The money, the deal, the reputation, it's all gone." Across town, my children were laughing, their fingers sticky with ice cream as they pointed at stars projected onto the planetarium dome. They didn't know their aunt's party was imploding. They didn't know their uncle's career was dissolving in real time. They only knew they were with parents who chose them, and that was the only status that mattered. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making pancakes when the doorbell rang. I didn't need to check the camera. I could feel the desperation radiating from the front porch. When I opened the door, Rachel was standing there. She wasn't wearing her usual polished uniform. She was still in yesterday's clothes. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked small. She looked ordinary. The velvet rope had been cut, and now she was just a woman standing outside in the cold. "Emily," she said, her voice cracking, "please." I stepped aside, not out of warmth, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see what she looked like when the filter was turned off. She walked into my kitchen, avoiding eye contact with the kids who were sitting at the island eating breakfast. "I need to talk to Michael," she whispered. "Michael is at work," I said, "and even if he were here, he wouldn't talk to you." "Please, Emily," she said, her voice breaking. "You have to help me. Daniel's firm, it's over. The investors pulled out. The partners are voting to remove him. We leveraged the house for this deal. If it collapses, we lose everything. Our home, the cars, everything." "I know," I said calmly. "That's what happens when you build a life on appearances." She shook her head, tears spilling. "I didn't know. I didn't know Michael was the one financing it. I thought he just worked in finance." "You thought he was nobody," I corrected. "You thought he was ordinary, so you treated us like we didn't matter." She flinched. "You curated your guest list to impress people who work for him. Rachel, do you understand how humiliating that is? You snubbed your own family to impress his employees." "I was trying to build something," she cried. "I wanted what you have, security, respect." "You don't get respect by treating people like props," I said, "and you don't get security by building a life on debt and exclusion." She reached for my hand. Please, just ask him to reinstate the deal. Daniel learned his lesson. I learned my lesson. Just one call. For family. I pulled my hand away. Family? I said quietly. You told my daughter she didn't fit your aesthetic. You made my son cry because he wasn't polished enough for your yacht party. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. You didn't care about family when you thought you were winning. You only care about family because you need a bailout. I looked over at my children, happily eating pancakes, laughing, completely unbothered by the woman who had tried to make them feel small. They were resilient. They were loved. They didn't need a yacht club to know their worth. No, I said. Emily, please. No, I repeated. Michael doesn't do business with people who make children cry. And neither do I. Rachel stood there for a long moment, the reality settling in. There would be no rescue. There would be no reversal. There would be no sequel. The brand was dead. She turned and walked out the door, back into a life that was about to become very, very small. Months later, Daniel's firm declared bankruptcy. They sold the townhouse. They sold the cars. They moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. We didn't celebrate their downfall, but we didn't mourn it either. We simply went on with our lives. We still go to the planetarium. We still pack juice boxes and granola bars. We still have movie nights in our ordinary living room. And every time I look at my husband, the quiet giant who loves us enough to burn down a kingdom for his children, I'm reminded of something important. True power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need a yacht club. It doesn't need linen napkins or crystal flutes. It doesn't posture. It doesn't curate. It waits. It watches how people behave when they think no one important is looking. And when a line is crossed, when children are made to feel small, it responds with precision. Michael never bragged about what he did. He never told the story. He never used it as leverage. To him, it wasn't revenge. It was enforcement. A boundary clearly drawn and firmly upheld. Our children never asked about the party again. They don't remember the exclusion the way I do. What they remember is that their parents chose them. That when someone tried to make them feel unworthy, the people who mattered stepped forward without hesitation. They learned something far more valuable than social status. They learned self-worth. They learned that love isn't conditional, that family isn't transactional, and that no aesthetic is worth sacrificing your integrity. As for Rachel and Daniel, they learned something too, though much later and at a far greater cost. Exclusivity isn't power. It's fragility disguised as control. And when you build your life on appearances, all it takes is one truth to bring the whole structure down. We are not VIPs at a yacht club. We are not part of an elite guest list, but we are chosen, we are protected, and we are enough. That's the only status that truly matters. Have you ever dealt with a family member who valued their image over your feelings? How did you handle it? Tell your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and follow for more stories about real boundaries, real consequences, and real justice.